more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome, everyone, to A Sense of Beer Style. I couldn't be more excited to talk about our Fruit Lambic that we are going to overview today for you and with you as part of the European Sour Ale category within the Beer Judge Certification Program 2021 guidelines. And Jeremy, our fellow listeners, I throw out to you, are not snobs. We're not snobs. And guess what the acronym is for our show, Jeremy? Is Sense of Beer Style, SOBs. So why don't we all call ourselves SOBs? Because if we were snobs, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have anything left to learn. We would just be busy telling the world what we think they should know. And that's not the point of this show. We learn with every show, with every sip, with every beer.
That's because we have a charisma that comes with a sense of beer style, is the way that I think of it.
I love that. And if you watch us, Jeremy has more charisma in his studio than me if you're on YouTube, but that's okay. I'm humble. I have more to improve on there. But whether you're listening or watching, let's talk about Fruit Lambic, right? This is, and you have baseline shows of Goose and Lambic to listen to as well. These are the fruited versions. And Jeremy and I both have one. He's pouring one right now. And, you know, it's a complex, very refreshing, partially sour, not overly sour, wheat-based beer. That's the main fermentable. And yet it has fruit in it, right? The fruit with wheat. Think of raspberry preserves on top of your sourdough bread, right? Think of fruit on top of maybe cheesecake. You've got this essence of wheat in there that is the base note, but the fruit really takes over. And then what's at the top of the pecking order, because it's a lambic, is the fermentation characteristics, and we'll talk all about that because beer's from Belgium. First and foremost, you were going to notice that the fermentation characteristics over the malt, over the hops, if they are any, over the other ingredients. So, Jeremy, talk about the history of this beer for us, please, while I open mine, and tell us about the ingredients.
Absolutely. And, please keep in mind, we are talking about Fruit Lambic. So if this is the first Stylecast that you're listening to within the Lambic family, great. Welcome. This is going to be awesome. But I urge you to immediately go listen to Lambic and Goose, because this is a mini series within the Sense of Beer Style. We can't really separate Lambic from Goose from Fruit Lambic. They all kind of go together. So let's talk about the ingredients. And I go into a little bit more detail in the Lambic Stylecast, talking about turbid mashing and all that. But we really are talking about the same ingredients for Lambic, Goose, and Fruit Lambic. And I'll just do a quick recap because I know you're going to go listen to the Lambic episode. But to brew these beers, we're using, the Lambic producers are using a 30 to 40% unmalted wheat, not malted wheat, unmalted wheat. They're also using Pilsner malt. They're using aged hops, which is used as a preservative, not a flavor. And all of that is used within their turbid mashing so that they can have basically food for all the critters for a very long maturing and fermentation life in the ballpark of like a year. But we are talking about Fruit Lambic. So we're going to take blended lambic and turn it into a goose. We're going to add fruit to that, and it could be raspberries. It could be typically we have these wonderful Sharbic cherries, which are deep and rich with the pits and everything. So you get all these wonderful flavors just from that alone. We can use peaches, all kinds of different fruits. And lastly, this is a fermentation-driven beer style inherently. God, look at that color. We're going to get to color in a minute. And for those of you who are listening, Julia just shined a light through her glass, and it was beautiful. So make sure you go back and watch this episode as well. But these beers, these are terroir driven. These are spontaneously fermented. They are aged in neutral oak barrels. So we're not getting a lot of oak character out of them, but we are getting some essence from the terroir, not only of the environment from which all the yeast and bacteria come from, but we're also getting a note of terroir from each individual barrel that is then blended to achieve the terroir of the brewer's hand. I heard from incredible brewer who learned from the wine folks that terroir really is the land, the weather, and the hand. And that includes the hand of the brewer and the hand of the blender. And so a lot of that has to go with, after it matures in these oak barrels, what the brewers do with it afterwards. That's also part of the terroir. When we're talking about the fermentation organisms, we're talking about the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the typical brewer's yeast, but we're also getting into Brettanomyces, another brewer's yeast. We're getting into Pediococcus, Lactobacillus, and other organisms that will create this beautiful beer. And when they take this lambic, they are going to blend it with 1, 2, and 3-year-old lambics to turn it into a gueuze, and then they'll add fruit to it. And so that's where we get this fruit lambic, aka a fruit gueuze. But this is already, this is a complicated process, complicated organism, complicated beer, and it's just wonderful. But so this is the background. This is setting the scene of the story that is Fruit Lambic. Now let's talk about the appearance. We're holding up our glasses. Let's get into that.
So appearance and will greatly vary because fruit can be how many fruits are there? I need to know that trivia. I'll Google it or tell us.
More than 2.
Right, definitely more than 2. And common fruit lambics, and there's different types and there's names, will take you to using raspberries, using cherries, using apples, using pears, using so many different types. So appearance, I just need to couch with the fact that because wheat is such a backdrop of light color, SRM, standard reference method, wheat, or Lovibond for the actual malt and unmalted grain is going to be very pale, like straw color. So we're talking about a beer that is influenced by the color. So in this case, influenced by the fruit. In this case, mine is influenced by raspberries, right? It is a deep kind of magenta, garnet, and actually the color of foam beautifully is displaying that color too, almost like a coral pink in the foam. So that's really fun to see. And fast rising bubbles. We'll talk about glassware in a little bit, but I'm getting some nucleation sites from the bottom of this glass. So fast rising bubbles, you're going to want a more aggressive, longer standing collar of foam. This one is displaying that, which is beautiful. And then you definitely have a sense that there's a dimension to this, right? The color is not one spectrum of that raspberry red. So that's pretty dang clear. And pretty dang cool. And speaking of clear, it doesn't have to be clear, but the guidelines kind of tilt it to that way. So usually these fruited lambics are clear, but could be cloudy from the actual fruit addition.
Yeah, and that clarity, honestly, and we mentioned this back in the gueuze Stylecast, but you, the listener, the drinker of Fruit Lambic, you have control over the clarity of this, because these are typically going to be, if they're in a bottle, which many of them are, and many of the ones that we're going to sample are in the bottle, they're going to be bottle conditioned, and there's going to be sediment. If they're stored correctly, which is upright, and they're poured silently, which is to keep or limit the sediment in your glass, then they will be fairly clear. If they're swirled, if they're sloppily poured, if they're the last pour for someone who wants to taste it, then it's going to be cloudy. So keep in mind that you are in control of your experience. When we get into the aroma, the dominant first aroma out of the gate is really going to be of that fruit. This becomes a fermentation and fruit forward beer style. And so whatever that fruit is, if it's a framboise, that's raspberries. If it's kriek, it's cherries, and so on and so forth. That would be the dominant character that we want to get. But it's not just It's not just a cherry for cherry's sake. These aren't these little red cherries you put on your ice cream sundae. There's a complexity to them. There's a deep, dark richness to them. If it's cherry, and that applies and it extrapolates to the other fruit as well. Behind that fruit flavor, behind that fermentation flavor, is this granted we can't smell acidity, but you get this impression that makes you assume that it's sour, but you get all those lemony sourdough kind of character that comes through it. You can start getting some of that Brettanomyces character, which is typically described as like farm animal, as barnyard, as it could be for those who have never really experienced a barnyard farm animal type of experience or a petting zoo type of experience. You start getting closer to kind of like a downtown inner city after a rain type of, it's kind of pungent. It may be a bit on the putrid side, but in a kind of a nice way, if you think about it. We don't expect to get any smoke out of this. We don't expect to get any cheesy or aged hop aromas. It shouldn't smell like sweaty gym socks. That cigar note, I don't really get wet cigar notes out of a Fruit Lambic. Sometimes I do in Goose and Lambic. And so if you get a little bit of that, then great. You've got a great palate for really good cigars. But it's that complexity of that fermentation and that fruit is really going to dominate this aroma. How does that translate into the flavor, Julia?
Well done, and it really does fall into the flavor. So there's not as much to say because Jeremy's covered a lot that you would notice. And I'm continuing to taste and smell the added fruit, right? And in the case of some of these beers, they're sometimes back sweetened. So they could have higher residual sugar in flavor or a little bit drier for sure. Not hop forward at all. There should be no sense of hop flavor. Hops would be added, if at all, just for preservative value. And traditional versions, as the style guidelines talk about, are dry and tart, even though versions, example, Lindemann's in my glass, is definitely emphasizing the sweetness. So it talks about, the style guidelines acknowledges that, where traditional versions, dry and tart, but then modern versions may have variable sweetness. And, sweet and acidity or acid play against each other. And then you put ethanol to the mix and you've got this beautiful little triangle of interplay and dance. As these age, I'm going to get less fruit and less sugar. They will become more active. My bottle, and many of them, has a punt, right? It's just like a champagne bottle. So it's accounting for that sediment that Jeremy was talking about. And so these beers will develop. They're great to lay down as well as drink anytime because, the world is here today. You don't know about tomorrow. So buy several bottles and then lay a few down, but don't not enjoy it. Try one each year kind of thing. And then you can try a fresh one from the store for, against your cellared versions that you've had sitting for maybe 5, 7, 10 years even. So flavor is also variable to that yeast characteristics, wild yeast, as well as microorganisms. But Jeremy kind of covered some of that. So I'm getting an essence of great yeast and flavor, but it's lighter on the tongue. And that leads us straight to mouthfeel. So I'll kick it over to you while I take a sip.
Yeah. Now these are fun beers to play with. And if you're going to study these beers, if you're going to learn about these beers, do your absolute best to find a younger version and an older version. Do what you can. Go to different bottle shops, because when we're talking about body, the body changes. These are bottle conditioned. They are oftentimes back sweetened. Sometimes they're just back sweetened with just the nature of having fruit in them as well. But the organisms, particularly Brettanomyces, will continue to work on the sugars that are in there, and these longer chain sugars and any starches that end up into the final beer. And so what I'm trying to get at here is if you taste one of these things and it's just really light body, really refreshing, thin on the palate, it might be an older version. If you have some that has some viscosity and some mouthfeel to it, that might be a younger version. And you can make some conclusions, some educated conclusions, just by how it feels in your mouth as to how much this beer is aged. And the only way to truly learn that is to compare a very young version, a very aged version. A bottle has been sitting around for up to 10 years, and some that are right in between, and taste them side by side just to get that sense of style, sense of beer style through the mouthfeel. So this could be, the guidelines say low to medium low body. It really kind of depends on the bottle itself. So keep that in mind. The puckering value, the physical manifestation of that acidity can be low to high. It really depends on the beer, depends on the brewer's hand in creating that hand influenced terroir. When we're talking about astringency, these beers should not be very astringent, even though they may have sat on oak. This is neutral oak. They're not going to impart a ton of it. If you notice a little bit, it's probably fine. If it kind of pokes you in the nose more than you'd like it to, that might be a problem. The alcohol warming ought to be low. These are not aggressively strong beers. But when it comes to carbonation, again, this is just a wide gamut, very low to high. What a range. I mean, way to cover all the bases with one swing. It really depends on the brewer, depends on the fruit, depends on the bottle, depends on storage, depends on your preference. The point is that there's a wide range here, so give a little bit of grace and just kind of understand that there are a lot of factors that influence this beer. That's it on mouthfeel. Let's talk about style comparison.
So style comparison's really tough because there's nothing like this. So you take the base beer, right? A goose or a lambic, and the best, frankly, kind of I'd call it horizontal, not vertical tasting. It would be a lambic, fresh, young, sweet, wonderful, Belgian farmhouse style beer. Then a goose of that same brand, which is going to be 1, 2, and 3 year blended. And then the Fruit Lambic, which is going to be the fruited version of that goose. That would take you through understanding. You could compare these to other fruited beers, but even the style guidelines points out you need that wild character, that fermentation character. There's just no way to compare it if it doesn't have the aspects of that Brettanomyces or yeast that's been used to bring it to this really kind of rustic yet well-rounded place. So tougher one, and I suggest the horizontal and report back.
Yeah. So commercial examples. Julia, you just made a comment a second ago that lends to this. This is not just a fruited beer. You can't just go get a fruited beer and say, "Oh, that must be a Fruit Lambic." It needs to be made in the tradition of lambic for you to taste these flavor notes. So the closest thing we can find at your excellent average brewery, if there's such a thing, is look for a fruited spawn beer or spontaneous beer, spontaneously fermented beer, and that will give you an easy way to find these things. If you're close to big box stores, you'll find some of these. Most grocery stores around the states and places I've been have Lindemans, and Lindemans is pretty ubiquitous. So shout out to them and their distribution network because they get that out there and is fantastic. But some of the classics to look out for if you're blessed with a beautiful bottle shop. One of my personal favorites is the Mort Subite Creek or Sudden Death cherry beer. The Trefontinen Charbix Creek, Cantillon Fufun, Cantillon Lupep, Frambois, the Cantillon, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Vigneron, and Hansen's Old Creek Boone. Now, keep in mind that Creek speaks to cherry, Frambois speaks to raspberry, Pêche speaks to peach, Pomme speaks to pear or apple. And so whatever fruit flavor you get, just understand that it's got to be have a little bit of gamey funk to it for it to kind of fit this category. But those are some of the commercial examples you can look out for. Julia, will you take us to the vital stats?
Yes, and vital stats are going to be based on the style guidelines. So the example I'm drinking is an outlier for sure on alcohol by volume. Lindemans
Yeah.
brings in, according to their website, 2.5%. That's way lower than I even remember. It explains why I can drink a glass and like just completely go on with my day.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of delightful. But actual ABV,
You're at risk of a sugar rush.
yeah, exactly. Actual ABV, though, in style range, easy to remember, 5 to 7. Very sessionable, 5 to 7. Original gravity, very approachable, 1040 to 1060, right? Just think one less 1040 of 5% alcohol, one less of 7% alcohol, 1060, maybe a good way to remember that. And then think that wild, wacky range of 10,000 for final gravity, which means virtually absolutely no residual sugar, to 1010. That's a broad range, but easy to remember, and it's also brewer's choice. So it allows for some of that residual sugar, that back sweetening that is known for some of these styles, or the addition of fruit to secondary fermentation that doesn't get fermented all the way out. That's going to leave you with some sugar. Then you've got international bitterness units. I mentioned these beers should absolutely not be bitter or known for flavor and aroma hops. That's just an aspect of this beer style. So you're not looking for hops. It's 0 to 10 for international bitterness units. 10 would just indicate enough hops were there for preservative value, but not really at perceptible levels. And then standard reference method, that color. I'm going to say totally variable. I don't even think the style guidelines should try. Like, wow,
Yeah.
why? They don't even, for SRM, we don't have anything with red hues or pretend you add peaches to your goose. How are you going to put a color to that? So 3 to 7 is what it says, but that's variable and nothing that I think that is fair to ask anyone to memorize, even though you could be asked it in a test. So 3 to 7,
Yeah.
don't forget that.
It, and basically that's really referring to the base style. If this beer didn't have any fruit in it, it would be an SRM of 3 to 7 or EBC of 6 to 14. But as soon as you throw fruit into beer, particularly fruit like cherries or raspberries, the color scale goes out the window. Don't even bother. And if you take a test and they lean in and look at you real solemn and say, "What's the SRM of a Fruit Lambic?" You can tell them that does not apply, sir or ma'am, because the fruit negates the ability to ascertain the color. You use a verbiage like that to let them know that you understand the process, but color scale does not apply here. If you are a Plato type person, then we're looking at, for original Plato, we're looking at 10 to 15, and final Plato of 0 to 2.5. And if you like the Plato scale for amount of alcohol, we're looking about 10 to 12.5 as well, which takes us to the glassware. It's common to have a lambic or even a goose served in a French water glass, or one of those glasses that has like 5 sides and kind of goes up, and they're kind of fancy for a water glass, but you see them in a lot of places. And that's perfectly fine to serve a fruited lambic in that glass as well. Personally, I prefer a stemmed tulip glass because this becomes almost wine-like for me. I want to use the stem to determine how much, what temperature my beer becomes, the drinkability. It's not just fancy for fancy sake. It's fancy for strategic sake. So I honestly do prefer a stemmed tulip for something like this.
I'm
Uh,
gonna jump
uh,
in because I've got
yeah, do
my
it.
champagne glass. There's many different
Oh,
styles, but
beautiful.
it's perfect, right? This is allowing the carbonation to concentrate, and keeps. It's not really a big emphasis, a flared out mouth or bump on the edge to coax out the volatilization of the aromatics. It's keeping things in here in a beautiful way, but they still slowly exit based on this kind of straight cylinder. And I love holding this. It's a great opportunity to swirl. So I think champagne glass all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, because this is also in the lambic family, you may see this served in a lambic basket. If you've got a friend who is a snob or a sob, you may see a lambic basket, and that's just to help facilitate a silent pour to keep the sediment out of there. So keep that in mind. But let's get into pairing, my favorite part.
Yeah, and I'm flipping through my beer pairing book with Gwen Conley, and it is a aspect of experimentation when you pair. And so often when I need to get a reading, and I won't worry about what we put in the book right now, I'll take you to how to get to your own pairing places. I think about the flavors already in the beer. And one way to pair is contrasts and opposites. They can often highlight each other, accentuate each other, or de-emphasize each other. But I also like the like connects with like. So what's in this? In my raspberry lambic, it is really like picking fresh raspberries that are just a little overripe off the vine in like late August or September, right? Up in the foothills or the mountains. And so I really want to emphasize the raspberry in any food that I'm going to pair it with. And the carbonation will create this kind of dry lifting sense. So what do you want to put on raspberries, right? Anything from, this is solo ABV, at least my Lindemans, I could have this as a breakfast beer and put this on, toast with raspberry jam, and it would be fantastic, right? You've got the wheat in the toast and from the bread, and then you've got the essence of raspberries already in that jam, and they will connect and really link up with each other. I'm also thinking duck, a real rich dish. I'm going to barrel over some of the nuance and delicate aspects, but what often goes on top of ducks is cranberries, right? Cranberry sauce. So this beer, this raspberry or a cranberry version or a cherry version, Creek version, could act as the sauce over that duck. And I would definitely say try that on for size. So those are two directions. Third would be dessert. I mean, I mentioned cheesecake earlier. I want to drizzle this over cheesecake. Besides taking a bath in this, I want to drizzle this over cheesecake and have it serve as that fruit on top of a cheesecake. Also maybe with vanilla ice cream to give that a try.
Yeah, these beers are really fun because when we think about pairing, bridging is one of those things that we talk about. But with this beer, we can bridge by extension. And what I mean by that is, imagine a cherry pie. We love the way that the cherries and that pie crust go together. It's just beautiful. But now we have this, if we take those further out, now we have this beer with cherries, if it's a Creek, or framboise, if it's raspberries. But we know cherries and pie crust go together. How about a cherry beer with something that's pie crust like? For example, shortbread cookies.
Nice.
What a great dessert that is. And this is not an advanced pairing technique, but it's not beginner either. So we just need to start making connections between the things that we love. I am not a huge fan of a big stout with chocolate cake, but you know what I love with chocolate cake? This is amazing with chocolate cake. This is amazing with the chocolate souffle. So my perfect dinner, I'm probably going to start with a Creek in this example, with some like hard, salty, dry cheeses. Maybe I want to have this with a rack of lamb, or one of the biggest challenges to my palate that drives me crazy is we often have a regular, forgettable beer with Mexican food. But Mexican food is some of the most interesting, complex food in the world. I want to have a beer like this with like a spicy a mole negro, something that just, it takes that flavor into a sharp left turn and into Happy Town. Yeah, these are all the things that I want to think about this beer differently. I want to think about our pairings differently, and this beer gives us that opportunity. So take that with what you will, but go out and experiment.
Well said, well described. Hopefully you all had a well-fined time and drink many of these, report back, listen and watch more, and thanks for being here.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.